My son called me an idiot during dinner. The words came out like a slap across the table, echoing louder than the clinking forks or the soft hum of the ceiling fan. He didn't just say it once. He shouted it, right there in front of his mother, his girlfriend, and the bright lights of the chandelier that suddenly felt like a spotlight burning through my skin. "You're an idiot, old man." The air froze. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate before ticking again. I looked at him, not with anger, but with that deep, hollow silence that comes only when your own blood forgets the meaning of respect. He was laughing, not the way he used to when he was a boy, running through the backyard with scraped knees and sticky hands. No, this was different. It was the laughter of arrogance. The kind that feeds on pride, not joy. His mother looked away, pretending to sip her wine. She didn't stop him. Not even a word. She just stared at her glass as if it had something more important to say than her husband being humiliated. And me? I just sat there, quiet, still. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon a man can wield. I could have shouted. I could have thrown him out that very moment. But I didn't. I just breathed in slow, letting the weight of his words settle like dust on old wood. I saw the veins in his neck when he yelled, the anger that came not from pain, but from entitlement. He thought he was above me now, a college boy with fancy friends, big dreams, and an attitude too expensive for his own pockets. He thought age was weakness. He mistook patience for stupidity. But that night, as I cleared the table alone, while he laughed in the living room, showing off his new watch and designer shoes, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was realization. I had spent my whole life making sure he never knew the weight of struggle. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe by protecting him from the pain of hunger and debt, I'd raised a man who no longer knew gratitude. I washed the dishes quietly. Each plate felt heavier than the last, not because of the food, but because of the memories they held. He used to sit right beside me watching cartoons while I worked 2 jobs to pay his school bills. He'd fall asleep at the table, head resting on my arm, and I'd smile, too tired to even eat. Now that same table had become a stage for his disrespect. That night, when everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the dark. The glow of the streetlight slipped through the curtains, painting half my face gold and the other half shadow. I thought of the tuition I'd just paid, how the college had sent me another reminder the week before. It wasn't small money. It was everything I'd saved from selling my tools, my old truck, even my mother's necklace, and he had the audacity to call me an idiot. I pulled out my phone and stared at the college's number saved under Education Office. For a long time, I didn't press it. Not yet. I wanted to sleep first, to wake up clear, to let my silence sink deep enough for him to hear it even without words. The next morning, the house was empty. His shoes were gone, his voice gone with them. Only the echo of that word remained, idiot. I sat at the table, sipped my coffee slowly, and looked at the unpaid electricity bill lying beside his tuition notice. Then I picked up the phone. The woman from the college spoke politely. She reminded me of the payment due date. I listened carefully. Then, with the calmest tone I'd used in years, I said, "From now on, please contact my son directly for anything related to his tuition." There was a pause. She seemed confused, but I didn't explain. I simply ended the call, placed the phone on the table, and smiled for the first time in a long while, because for once, he was about to learn what it meant to live without his father's wallet, shielding his arrogance. And this time my silence wouldn't protect him. It would teach him. For 2 days I heard nothing. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the refrigerator's hum felt louder than usual. I spent my mornings fixing things that didn't need fixing. The leaky tap, the loose door hinge, the old clock that never really worked right. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind steady. But deep down I knew the silence before the storm never lasted long. On the 3rd morning, as I sipped my black coffee by the window, my phone buzzed. Not once, but over and over again. It was him. My son. I let it ring, then ring again, and again. Finally, I picked up on the 4th call. There was panic in his voice, the kind I hadn't heard since he was a child afraid of thunder. "Dad, did you forget to pay the college bill?" he said, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, not to punish, but to let his words hang heavy in the air between us. Dad? He said it again, softer this time. Almost respectful. I didn't forget, I finally said. I just decided it was time you handled it yourself. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then a low, bitter laugh. You're kidding, right? He said. Come on, you can't be serious. I've got deadlines, classes, projects. I was serious when you called me an idiot, I interrupted. The line went silent again. Only his breathing, a fast, uneven, filled the space. Dad, I didn't mean it, he muttered after a moment. It was just a joke, I smiled to myself. It always becomes a joke when life gets hard. I'm sure it was, I said. But this time you'll handle your own joke. Before he could speak again, I ended the call. For the rest of the day, the house felt lighter. I could finally hear the birds outside, the rustle of leaves through the window. It wasn't peace exactly, but something close to it. By evening, another call came. Not from him, but from the college again. A different voice this time. Tough man, polite but firm, explaining that the tuition had been overdue for weeks and the student was about to lose access to the system. I listened quietly and said the same thing I'd said before. Please contact my son directly. The man hesitated, then in a softer tone asked, Sir, are you sure? I smiled. Very sure. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Somewhere between pride and sadness, my chest felt heavy. I wasn't trying to ruin him. I just wanted him to understand. Every bill I'd paid had come from nights of back pain, long hours and skipped meals. But to him, money was air, an invisible, endless, free. I wanted him to feel the weight of the things he took for granted. The roof, the meals, the comfort of never worrying. The next morning my phone buzzed again. Messages this time. Dad, please call me back. They're saying I can't attend class until payment clears. This is embarrassing. Just pay it and I'll give it back next week. Dad? Each message came faster, the tone shifting from arrogance to desperation. By the 10th one, I stopped counting. I went about my day, swept the porch, watered the plants, repaired the chair leg that had been loose for months. Every sound outside reminded me of years spent providing, mowing lawns, fixing fences, doing everything to make sure my family never struggled the way I once did. Now, my son was getting his first taste of struggle, and I hoped he'd learn not to choke on it. By the weekend, he came home, unannounced. His car screeched into the driveway like a storm arriving without warning. He didn't even knock, just pushed open the door and walked in, shoulders tense, eyes blazing with frustration. Dad, what's wrong with you? He said, slamming his backpack onto the table. You're really letting me fail over a stupid argument? I looked up from the newspaper. He looked different, tired, maybe scared. His fancy watch was gone, his clothes wrinkled. Arrogance was still there, but now it was cracking. You said I'm an idiot, I said calmly, and I believed you. So I figured I shouldn't handle things too smart for you. He blinked. For a moment I saw something behind his anger. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Dad, please, he said, voice low. I can't get back into class without payment. I folded my papers slowly. You're 21, I said. You've got a job at that cafe, right? Maybe you can start paying the bills the way I did at your age. He scoffed. It's not enough. I stood up, finally meeting his eyes. It never is, and until you make it enough. He stared at me, jaw tight, breathing heavy. But he didn't argue. Not this time. He just turned and left, and slamming the door behind him. The house shook. And for a moment I did too, but I didn't chase after him, because some lessons, they only grow in silence. That night, as I sat by the window again, the wind carrying the city's hum through the curtains, I whispered quietly to myself, this isn't punishment. This is education. He wanted to be a man, so now he'd learn what being one truly costs. 3 days passed since he slammed that door. 3 long, heavy days. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't even check his social media, though I knew he was posting. His life always had to be on display, but sometimes silence teaches louder than 1,000 words. That Thursday morning, I was cleaning the porch when I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. Only it wasn't his. It was one of his friends, Marcus, the tall one with the loud laugh and empty pockets. He got out, nodded at me awkwardly, and asked, Hey, Mr. Jenkins, is Jay home? I shook my head. He doesn't live here anymore, remember? Marcus laughed a little, scratching his neck. Yeah, right, just tell him to call me, okay? I nodded. But I knew something was off. There was tension in his voice, the kind that comes when money gets involved. A few hours later, I got my answer. My phone buzzed again. This time, a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I heard my son's voice, shaky, low. Not angry this time, but just defeated. "Dad," he said softly. "They kicked me out of my dorm." I paused, closing my eyes for a moment. "Why?" I asked. He swallowed hard. I couldn't pay the balance. And Marcus and the others, they took the money I had left. Said they'd help me flip it. I trusted them. I didn't say a word, because the truth was louder than anything I could have said. He kept talking, his voice cracking like dry wood. I don't have anywhere to go right now. I'm at the bus station." "Did you eat?" I asked quietly. No, I took a long breath. I could feel the father in me wanting to run to him, to fix it, to bring him home and feed him. But I stayed still. Because sometimes love means letting someone feel the full weight of their choices. "All right," I said after a moment. "There's $20 in the glove compartment of the old truck. You can take that for food. The rest you'll have to figure out." He didn't argue, didn't yell, just said okay and hung up. That night I sat alone in the kitchen, the clock ticking louder than usual. The same clock that had ticked through his childhood, through my long nights working, through his laughter, and now, through his silence. For the first time in years, I prayed. Not for money, not for success. Just for my son to finally see me. Not as an old fool, but as the man who built the ground he stood on. By the next morning he came home again. But this time not with arrogance, with exhaustion. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes red and hollow. He didn't look like the proud young man who had once called me an idiot. He looked like a child who had finally met the real world and lost. He stood at the door, not stepping in. Just staring at me. "Dad," he whispered, "can I come in?" I didn't move for a long moment. Then quietly I nodded toward the chair. He sat down like a man carrying stones on his back. "I tried to call Marcus," he said softly, "but his number's disconnected. They took everything, Dad, every cent. I'm so stupid." His voice broke mid-sentence and he covered his face with his hands. I didn't speak. I just watched. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not to see him suffer, but to see him understand. After a while he looked up. "Dad, how did you do it?" "Do what?" I asked. "Live all those years. Raise a family. Pay bills. Handle everything without falling apart." I leaned back, exhaled slowly. "Because I had no one to catch me," I said. "When life hit me, I learned to hit back. Not with anger, but with work." He nodded slowly, his eyes filling with something I hadn't seen in years, respect. "Not the kind you force, but the kind life teaches." "I thought you had it easy," he said. "I used to laugh at your old clothes, your simple phone, your habits. But now I get it. You were saving. You were building." I smiled faintly. "I was living," I said. "And you were learning, just not the lessons you thought." We sat there in silence. No anger, no shouting. Just the sound of two generations finally breathing. The same air again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. The same kind I used to hand him with lunch. "Money when he was in high school. I got a job at the car wash," he said quietly. "It's not much, but I'll pay my college fees, even if it takes months." I looked at him. This boy who had once thought the world revolved around him, now humbled by the same world he ignored, and I felt something shift inside me. Not pity, not pride, just peace. "All right," I said softly. "Let's start there." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll make you proud, Dad." I shook my head. "You don't need to. Just make yourself honest." He smiled faintly. For the first time in years, it was real. As he stood to leave, I said, "One more thing." He turned around. "The next time you sit at a dinner table," I said, "and you feel like calling someone an idiot, remember who paid for the chair you're sitting on." He froze, then nodded slowly. "I will." He walked out quietly, and though I didn't show it, my eyes watered. Because finally, the boy I raised was beginning to meet the man he was meant to be. It's strange how peace sneaks up on you. Not with a celebration, not with noise, but with quiet mornings when the house finally feels like it's breathing again. I'd gotten used to the silence after all those angry dinners. But now silence felt different. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was rest. The rhythm of our days had changed. My son worked 2 jobs now. Mornings at the garage, evenings at a small store down the block. He no longer complained about money or blamed the world for his mistakes. He just worked. And I watched him quietly from the porch like I used to when he was a little boy running off to school. Sometimes when he came home late, I'd already be half asleep in the chair by the window. He'd whisper, "Night, Dad," thinking I couldn't hear. But I always did. One Saturday afternoon, he came in holding a small brown envelope. "Dad," he said, smiling shyly, "you'll be proud of me." He opened it. Inside was a paycheck. His first full month's pay. Not much, but honest. He handed it to me, insisting I take some. I pushed it back. "You earned it. Spend it wisely." He frowned, almost disappointed. "But you always said—" "I said be responsible," I interrupted softly. "Not dependent." He smiled and nodded, pocketing the envelope carefully. That moment, simple as it was, felt like years of lessons condensed into silence. A few days later, something changed. I could feel it before I knew it. He came home quieter than usual. Didn't eat much, didn't talk. That same restlessness from months ago crept back into his eyes. "What's going on, son?" I asked one evening. He hesitated, then sighed. Marcus came back, that name again, like a shadow that refused to fade. "He says he's got a new job offer," my son continued. "Some startup thing. Says if I invest now, I'll double my money in 2 weeks." I just looked at him. Not angry, not disappointed, just tired. He knew that look. The look that said, "Don't let history repeat itself." He stared down at the table. "Dad, it sounds real this time." I leaned back slowly. "Does it sound real? Or does it sound easy?" He didn't answer. Just stared at the floor, caught between wanting to believe and knowing better. That night I didn't sleep much, because that's what parenthood becomes after a while. Sleepless nights, not from noise, but from memories. You start replaying every mistake, every word you wish you'd said differently. The next morning he left early. Didn't say where he was going. But I already knew. I spent the whole day on the porch watching the street, counting every passing car like a prayer. When he finally returned, it was evening. He looked worn, hollow. He didn't even remove his jacket. Just stood there in the doorway, eyes glassy. "I didn't give him the money," he said quietly. I exhaled, relief and pride mixing like warm air on a cold day. He walked to the kitchen, sat down and buried his face in his hands. "I wanted to," he whispered. "I almost did. But I remembered what you said, about how easy things cost the most." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He just breathed. "That's what growing up feels like," I said softly. "It's not about getting everything right. It's about stopping yourself from making the same wrong twice." He nodded, his voice cracking. "Dad, I don't know how you did it all those years." "By believing one day you'd understand," I said. He looked up at me then, really looked. And I could see the man forming behind those tired eyes. A man who'd been burned but was finally learning to heal. A week later, I came home from the store and found a brand new tool set sitting on the table with a note. "For you, Dad, so we can fix things together again." My eyes stayed on that note for a long while, because it wasn't about the tools. It was about the bridge he was rebuilding. One small act at a time. We spent that weekend fixing the porch railing, repainting the walls, even patching the old gate that used to creak. And for every nail we hammered, there was a little piece of the past we buried beneath it. While we worked, he said, "Dad, do you ever wish you'd done things differently with me?" I paused. "Every parent does," I said. "But wishing doesn't raise a better son, time does." He smiled faintly. "And patience. Patience," I repeated. "That's the hard one." By sunset, the porch was shining again, the same one he used to slam the door on. Now he stood beside me, hands covered in paint, looking out at the street. "Feels good to fix something," he said. I nodded. "It always does. Especially when it's something that matters." He turned to me then, not as a boy, not as someone broken, but as a man finally steady on his feet. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly, "for everything." I didn't need an apology, but I let him say it, because sometimes saying sorry isn't about the past. It's about freeing the future. That night when he went to bed, I sat on the porch again. The stars were faint, but enough. And I thought about all the times I had stayed silent, when anger burned my throat. Maybe that silence wasn't weakness after all. Maybe it was faith. Faith that one day he'd find his way back without me yelling directions. The next morning, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Laughter. My son laughing on the phone. Real laughter, not the cruel kind he once used against me. It filled the house like sunlight, and I realized we both survived something bigger than anger. We'd survived pride, and that's rarer than love. There are moments in life when silence becomes thunder, when the quiet you've carried for years finally finds its voice, not in words, but in what others finally see for themselves. That moment came on a Tuesday morning. The same kind of morning I'd lived 1,000 times, coffee, paper, the soft hum of an old clock. But something in the air felt different. My son rushed in, phone in hand, his face pale. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling, "you need to see this." He turned the screen toward me, an email from the college. Scholarship offer, full tuition. His name printed right there in bold letters. I looked at him, stunned. He whispered, "They said one of the donors recommended me personally." I smiled faintly. He didn't know. He didn't know that I was that donor. The same idiot old man who once embarrassed him at dinner. I'd been saving for months, quietly, secretly. Every penny from my small pension, every side job fixing broken fences for neighbors. And now it had come full circle. He sat there in disbelief, reading the email again and again. "Dad, I didn't even apply for this." I took a slow breath. "Sometimes life gives back when you finally learn to respect what you had," I said quietly. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time without pride, without ego, without that thick wall between us. And I could see it, realization, regret, gratitude, all crashing through him like a storm. "Was it you?" he whispered. I just sipped my coffee and said, "Finish what you started, son." That's when he broke. He leaned forward, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Not from sadness, from understanding. For years I had tried to teach him what respect meant. But life had to show him. He got up suddenly and came toward me, dropping to one knee beside the chair. "Dad, I was wrong. About everything, I didn't move. Just let him speak. I thought you were weak because you didn't fight back. I thought money made a man important. But I see it now. Real men stand still while the world mocks them because they know time will do the talking." He looked up at me with eyes wet and trembling. "Thank you for not giving up on me." That line, as it tore something inside me open, because I had given up a little. Many nights, I had sat in that same chair thinking maybe I failed as a father, but hearing that, it was like the universe whispering, "No, you just needed to wait." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Get up, son," I said softly. "You don't kneel to your father. You stand beside him." He stood straightened, and for the first time, we looked eye to eye, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two men who finally understood each other. That evening we went out for dinner, the same restaurant where he once shouted those cruel words. The waitress recognized us, and I saw her eyes flicker with memory. My son noticed too. He smiled faintly and said, "My dad's the smartest man I know." The waitress raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised. I just chuckled. Life had come full circle. While we waited for our meal, he said quietly, "You know, I used to think you were afraid to speak." I nodded. "I wasn't afraid," I said. "I was teaching." "You just weren't ready for the lesson." He laughed softly, not out of mockery this time, but from deep respect. And I realized something. He wasn't the only one who'd changed. I had too. I had stopped needing him to be perfect, stopped needing the apology to heal me. Because forgiveness isn't about the one who asks. It's about the one who chooses to let go. When we finished dinner, he insisted on paying. And I let him. Because sometimes letting someone give back is the greatest gift of all. As we stepped outside, the sky was painted with orange and pink, the air warm and heavy with the scent of evening rain. He looked at me and said, "Dad, I want to make you proud." I smiled, shaking my head slowly. "You already did, son. The day you stopped being ashamed of your father." He nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "Guess the idiot finally learned something." I chuckled. "No, son. The idiot just grew up." He laughed too, that deep, honest laugh I hadn't heard in years, and it echoed down the quiet street, soft and free. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone again in my old chair by the window. The stars looked sharper somehow, clearer, like they'd been waiting for this moment too. I took out his first note, the one he'd left months ago with $200 inside. "For the bills. From your idiot son. And I smiled. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't payback. It's watching the ones who hurt you become better. Because you refuse to become bitter. The next morning I woke up to the sound of a car engine. I looked out the window. My son was heading off to college again. Before he drove away, he looked up at the porch, saw me, and raised his hand in a wave. I raised mine back, proud but quiet like always. And in that small, wordless moment, every wound, every insult, every sleepless night finally made sense. Because respect doesn't come when you demand it. It comes when you earn it, by living long enough to prove that silence was never weakness. It was strength in disguise. And as his car disappeared down the street, I whispered to myself, the idiot grew up. And so did his father. Days turned into weeks. And for the first time in his life, my son woke up before sunrise. He wasn't going to class now. He was going to work. The same boy who once complained that mornings are for old people was now up at 5:30, scrubbing cars in the biting cold, with hands that once only held a phone and a video game controller. Sometimes I'd watch him from the porch, hidden behind the curtains. He didn't see me. He just walked down that old road with his hoodie up and his head low, like a soldier on his way to war. I won't lie. There was a strange ache in my chest. Not pain, not pride. Something heavier. Maybe it was seeing him face what I had faced my whole life, that invisible fight between dignity and desperation. He'd come home at night exhausted, his uniform damp with soap and sweat. He'd barely speak, just nod at me before collapsing into bed. But every night before he slept, he'd sit quietly at the kitchen table with his small notebook, writing something down. I asked him once, "What do you write in there?" He smiled faintly. "Every dollar I save," he said. "Every little step." That hit me harder than I expected, because when I was his age, I used to write down the same thing. Every cent I saved, every meal I skipped to make sure my family ate. It was strange seeing my old self reflected in the boy who once mocked everything I stood for. One Friday evening, I came home from the store and saw him outside fixing the old truck. The same one he used to call a piece of junk. Now he was under it, covered in grease, humming softly like I used to when I worked night shifts. I stood there for a minute, just watching. He noticed me and grinned faintly. "Hey, it's not junk, Dad," he said. "It just needed someone to care for it." That one line, simple, humble, carried more apology than any sorry ever could. A few days later, I heard him on the phone. He didn't know I was near. He was talking to the college's finance office, asking about payment plans. "I'll pay what I can every week," he said. "No excuses. I just need a chance to keep studying." The woman must have agreed because he let out a long breath of relief. When he hung up, I quietly stepped away before he noticed I was listening. That night, over dinner, he said something I never thought I'd hear. "Dad, I was thinking about dropping out before, but now I see why you pushed me. It's not about school. It's about finishing what you start." I looked at him, my fork frozen mid-air. There was no arrogance in his tone, no hidden attitude. Just clarity. And I realized this wasn't the same boy who shouted, "You're an idiot, old man." No, this was someone new, still learning, still stumbling, but finally awake. Weeks turned to months. The house began to feel alive again. He started fixing things, the broken faucet, the porch light, even repainting the front door. He didn't do it because I asked. He did it because he finally understood what home meant. One morning, he placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table before leaving for work. Inside was $200, a note read, "For the bills. From your idiot son." I didn't cry, but my throat burned. I kept that note in my wallet, folded neatly behind my ID. One Sunday after church, an old neighbor stopped me. "Your boy's different these days," she said. "Used to see him drive past us without a glance. Now he helps folks carry groceries. What happened?" I smiled faintly. "Life happened," I said. "And life's the best teacher there is." The following week I came home early to find him sitting on the porch, phone in hand. His face was serious. "You okay, son?" I asked. He looked up, sighing. "Yeah, Marcus called. That name again." The same friend who had stolen his money and vanished. "He's broke now," my son continued. "Said he needed help. Said I should lend him what I saved. I didn't say anything and I just waited. He looked at me, almost searching my face for an answer. I told him no, he said finally, Because I learned that not everyone deserves a second chance, especially when they never learned from their first. That line, it came out of him naturally, calm but heavy. And in that moment I realized he had grown not because of me, not because of luck, but because of loss. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling deeply. "I used to think you were just bitter, Dad," he said. "But now I get it. You weren't bitter, you were tired. Tired of giving to people who only took." For the first time I smiled with pride that didn't need to hide behind silence. "Son," I said softly, "you just learned the cost of kindness. It's never free." He chuckled a little. "Yeah," he said. "Guess I paid the tuition." We sat there as the sun began to fall behind the rooftops, golden light stretching across the porch, touching both of our faces. Two men once worlds apart, now sitting in the same piece, and I thought, maybe this is what every father wants, not perfection, not obedience, but understanding, because when your child finally understands your silence, that's when you've truly spoken. The next morning I woke up to the sound of a key turning in the front door. It was my son, leaving early again for work. But this time before he left, he stopped by my room. "Dad," he whispered. "Yeah? Thanks for letting me fall." I nodded slowly. "Just make sure you keep getting up." He smiled and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. And that's when I realized the boy who once called me an idiot was finally becoming the kind of man I had always hoped he'd be.